Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is fantastic to be recording back to all of you again on Off to Tube, Distance Learning Week 2. By now, you've probably all read my message about the AP exam, and you read that the AP exam is going to be a document-based question, where the College Board is going to give you a set of 5 documents, and those documents you are to then read through those documents and use the documents in order to answer a long essay question. And I'm sure some of you are saying, I don't know what a document-based question is. We've never done a document-based question. Mr. Offedal, why didn't you ever teach us how to do a document-based question? You're the worst teacher I've ever had. I can't believe you ever did that. Why would you do that? You're the worst. I hate you. You've ruined my life. So this video is here to put some of those fears at ease. The good news is many of the skills that are required to do a document-based question are based on long essays. In fact, I teach DBQs or document-based questions last because I think the hardest part is figuring out how to structure and write a College Board level essay. So since you've had a ton of practice at that, now what we're going to do is we're going to add the skill of document analysis to everything that you've learned. And so what we're going to start out doing today is we're going to look at the rubrics, figure out what it is that the College Board is going to be grading us on, and then I'm going to go through one of those supplemental assignments for this week on the women's suffrage movement, and we're going to do a practice DBQ together. And I'm going to do some of it for you. I'm going to model it for you, and then I'm going to have you do a little bit of it on your own, so that you start practicing the skill of document analysis. My hope is that this video will put some of those fears at ease, that you'll feel a little bit more confident, and especially confident in that from now until the AP exam in May, or if you decide to take the June date, we're going to be practicing DBQs. So we're going to be doing a lot of practice on that, applying the skills that we already learned on how to write an essay, and just, again, adding the skill of document analysis. So enough of looking at my ugly mug. Let's just get straight into it. So as we start looking at this rubric, I just want you to know you have access to this document. This document is on Neo under Resources. And as I'm going through this, I would actually encourage you guys to either have a pen and paper out and or some sort of Google Doc that you can reference, because I'm going to be taking some notes. I'm going to be marking this document up, again, just like we did when we went over the long essay rubric earlier in the year. So here's what the College Board is grading you on. The first thing I want you to notice is that the DBQ is out of 7 points. The long essay question that we've been doing has traditionally been out of 6 points. So this is one more point to consider. So we're going to look at what exactly they're expecting and what earns each of those points. The first thing you're graded on is a thesis or a claim. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how many thesis statements have you written for this class? Not just on Friday exams, but also preparing for Friday exams, the assignments that we do in class. You have written a ton of thesis statements. And so as long as you respond to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning using those John Mayer skills that I've taught you, you are going to get that thesis point. The next thing that the College Board is going to grade you on is contextualization. Again, they're going to give you this set of 5 documents. Traditionally, DBQs do 7 documents, but because of the shortened nature of this year's AP exam, they've cut it down to 5. They're going to give you a set of 5 documents. They want you to be able to say, well, what the heck was going on around these documents? What's the broader historical context? What is happening in this time period in general? What is this topic that the documents are discussing? And then if the documents are from a specific place, what the heck is going on in this specific place? And again, you've done that. We've done that funnel model in all of our long essay questions. I've given you those dorky things to remember the time periods, and we've practiced doing contextualization. So the good news is that the first 2 points out of the 7 are things that you already know how to do. And you already know that these things, well, whatever, we'll just keep it that way, but you know I mean to do a bracket there. These things are going to go into the introduction paragraph. It's something that you're already aware of doing. The next thing that the College Board is going to expect of you is evidence. Again, you are very familiar with how to use evidence in an argument essay for the College Board, or in an AP style essay. The good news here is that the evidence doesn't have to come from your brain. The evidence is going to come from the documents. So you're going to be reading through this set of 5 documents, and you're going to be using the evidence that they provide in order to formulate your argument, which is really nice. You don't have to remember all those specific things that you've been having to remember all year for the long essay questions. So it's actually pretty good news that the College Board is doing a DBQ. I think it relieves some of that stress for you going into the exam. Now, of course, anytime that we see a 1 point or 2 points, we just ignore the 1 point because we don't want the 1 point. We want the 2 points. In order to get it, you're going to support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 6 of the documents. Now, again, traditionally in DBQs, there are 7 documents. We're actually going to practice with just 7 documents so that when you get to the AP exam, 5 documents will be a cinch for you. So, we'll start with just for the College Board. If the College Board on the AP exam gives you 5 documents, then technically their rubric is going to say you have to use at least 4. In our DBQs that we're going to do, I'm going to give you 7 documents. And so the College Board would say you have to do 6. You thought. I'm not going to have you use 6 documents. That's silly. I'm going to make sure that you are going to use and practice using all of the documents. Now, why do you say, why, Mr. Oftedal, why would you ever do this to me? You're cruel, you're inhumane. Again, you're the worst person that has ever been in my life. Well, the reason for doing it is this. In order to get that 2 points, you have to appropriately and effectively and correctly support your argument using evidence from at least 6 of the documents, or on the AP exam, 4 of the documents. But here's the deal. If you only use 4 of the documents and you misinterpret it, you automatically only get 1 point. I would rather you get this full amount of points. So I'm saying use all of the documents with the expectation that you might misinterpret one of them. These documents are not always going to be easy to understand. Some of them are going to be a little bit complicated. So give yourself a buffer. So for your sake, when you're thinking about using evidence, you're going to use evidence from all of the documents. And of course, all of the document isn't grammatically correct. And of course, we want to make sure that we are somewhat grammatically correct on these videos since they're going to be viral on YouTube. I'm going to be an internet sensation. Coffee in the morning is delicious. Now, again, in order to support the argument, you're going to have to use all evidence from all of the documents. Now, before you start thinking like, well, what does that mean? How do I use evidence? Well, in a sense, you're going to just paraphrase evidence from the documents. You don't necessarily have to use quotes. You can if it's something that's a little bit short, but don't feel like you have to. You're going to paraphrase what the document is saying. You're going to introduce the document / cite the document by simply using the phrasing in Doc 1 or, whoa, I don't know what just happened there. Let's just do another one. You're going to use the phrase in document 1, or you're going to say document 1 states, or you're going to write your evidence, and you're just going to say cite 1. So there are different ways for you to use all of the evidence. Again, you're going to be paraphrasing in general, and then you're going to cite it one of those 3 ways, either saying document 1 says, or in document 1, or you're going to say whatever it is that your paraphrase is, and then just cite it using the parenthetical citations at the end. Either way, you want to make sure you use this number. That's going to slap the reader in the face and let them know, hey, I have used all of these documents. So that's how you use evidence. Now again, that's for 2 out of the 3 points of evidence. In order to get the other points, you have to use evidence beyond the document. So here's where the College Board is expecting you to remember and think and come up with evidence from your historical knowledge. And again, that specific piece of evidence should be relevant to the prompt, and it should also help to prove your argument. But I want you to notice, it says use at least 1 additional piece of outside evidence. So as you're reading these documents, if there's something that you remember from history that isn't mentioned in the document but helps to prove your point, then that's what you're going to add into. And I'll go through how we're going to break down these documents to make sure that we have at least 1 additional piece of evidence as we go through. Now again, it's not enough to just say it, just like this evidence from the documents. You're going to have to explain all your evidence as well. So again, it says here that the response must describe the content from at least 6 of the documents, and it must use the content of the documents to support it. So you can't just say, document 1 says this, and say, yay, I did it, woo! No, you have to explain how each piece of evidence from the document or outside the document is going to prove your argument. The last thing that the College Board grades you on is analysis and reasoning. Now, there's 2 sections here. One that you're used to doing, and another that you are kind of used to doing because we've done it a little bit, but we're going to go over how to do it more specifically. Let's go over briefly the new thing. So for at least 3 of the documents, and this is harder, so I'm actually going to say go ahead and just plan on doing 3 of the document. You have to explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or, it's not all of them, audience is relevant to an argument. So ladies and gentlemen, that should sound somewhat familiar to you, because what the College Board is saying, for at least 3 of the documents, you are expected to do, whoa, that is not what I meant to do. You are expected to do HIPPO, or what I call a hip check. And you can't see me doing the hip check, but right now I'm swaying my hips back and forth because that's how you do a hip check. Any of you play hockey, you know that you slam your hips into the opponent against the boards, and that's how you do a hip check. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, you're going to be looking at the documents and trying to determine the historical context, the intended audience, the point of view, or the purpose for 3 of these documents. And you're going to explain how or why one of those things is relevant to your argument. Now we're going to practice this. This is probably the hardest part of the DBQ, but I also want you to notice that that's 1 point out of 7. But this is probably the hardest point to get on the document-based question. The last point of analysis is demonstrating a complex understanding of the historical development. That's the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the same thing that you've been doing. These first 2 points are, of course, your analysis statements, right? When you're looking at explaining a nuance of an issue, or explaining the similarity and difference, or continuity and change, or causes. By doing an analysis statement, you will effectively earn this point. The other way to earn this analysis point in a DBQ is to do a synthesis statement. So let me just go ahead and label these for you guys so that you know kind of what I'm talking about. Those first 2 are your analysis statements, and those last bit, you know them as your synthesis statements. So all of these are ways of getting this point. You can either do an analysis statement explaining why it's a cause and effect, why it's a similarity and difference, why there's a continuity and change, or, wow, I can't believe Mr. Oftedal said the word or you can do a synthesis statement by simply in your conclusion paragraph either providing evidence that connects within and across time periods, either within the time period from a different place, across the time periods in a different in the same place, by corroborating multiple themes. So if the theme of the DBQ is a political theme, well, maybe talk about how this also applies culturally, or qualifying or modifying your argument by considering a different or alternative view. Maybe while this was very true for the wealthy class, perhaps for the poorer classes, it was not the case. That's a way of earning your synthesis points. So I just want you guys to see this. This is a point that you've done before in your LEQ. Using evidence before is something that you're very used to. So that's going to be points that you're used to doing. And your thesis and your contextualization is also something that you're very used to. So a majority of the DBQ is going to draw upon skills that we've been practicing all year. The major shift here is that the evidence is going to come from the documents, and that we have to practice doing a little bit more deeper document analysis in order to do so. So that's what we are going to be practicing. So this is how you earn the points. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example DBQ that I have given you. Ooh, and I actually realized that there's something that I want to go over with you first as we go through. This in general is what a document-based question is going to look like. They're going to give you documents in little boxes like this. The documents are probably going to be a little bit shorter than the ones in this example, but not much shorter, especially since they're giving you 5 of them. They're probably going to be about this length, but you can see they're not incredibly long. They're not as long as those green puke pages in the back of the Strayer chapters. They're a little bit shorter. The documents are going to always include a source, as you can see up here, giving you a little bit of information about who the author of the document is, where they're from, and a little bit of information there. The documents are going to be a combination of either written sources, like you can see here, or they might also have some images. And of course, for whatever reason, my image didn't download here, but that's okay, I can show you on this one. Or they're going to be images. The College Board has said at least one of the documents in a DBQ will be some sort of visual source. So just be aware of that. It might be a picture like I've given you here. It might be a map. It might be a chart or a graph, something like that. But at least one, it could be more, but at least one of the documents will be a visual source. So this is in general what a DBQ looks like, just to give you that idea. And when we practice DBQs in this class, I'm going to present the documents in this exact format. The one thing that I want you to see before we get going is what the instructions for the DBQ look like. And I'm sorry, that was the one thing I did not do. So let me just go ahead and modify my plan for a second, and we will get to it. Wait, why is he going to AP European History? Well, that's just because I know that I just downloaded a bunch of DBQs here. And you can see I've actually went through and downloaded a bunch of the DBQs from past years. So let's just look at the DBQ from last year. So when the College Board gives you a DBQ, the first thing that you are going to see are these instructions. Now, when you see these instructions, I want you to read all of the directions. Wait, what am I doing? Off it all, you crazy kid. There we go. There's the DBQ. The instructions are going to look like this, and the instructions are always going to be here. And so anytime you get a DBQ, I'm going to make sure that these instructions are provided for you, and I'll add them to the DBQ document that we're doing for this week after I'm done with this video. But the instructions are always going to look like this. It's going to give you the time limit on this year's AP exam. By the way, that time limit is going to probably be 45 minutes. They're going to tell you the suggested reading and writing time for the DBQ. Usually the suggested reading time, as you can see, is about 15 minutes to read through the documents. Because there's 5 documents, they might modify that to 10, but for our case, and we're doing 7 documents, it's going to be 15 minutes. And they say you should spend about 45 minutes writing your response. So again, the College Board is giving you a hint. They know that you're going to be very nervous on the day of the exam. So they want to make sure that you know exactly what is expected. They're going to give you these directions that say, Question 1 is based on the accompanying documents. The documents have been edited for the purpose of this exercise. I want you to see that, because what that means is that the documents have been edited to make sure that the answer to the question is there. They're not giving you trick documents. The documents might be difficult. The documents might give you multiple interpretations, but the documents have been edited so that you can answer the question. They're not trying to trick you. Then they go further and they say, here's everything that you should have in your DBQ. So in your response, you should do the following. Respond to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. Describe a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. Support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 6 of the documents. Use at least one additional piece of historical. Oh, the College Board literally goes through exactly what the rubric is that they are going to be grading you on. Again, this is your checklist. So ladies and gentlemen, anytime you're doing a DBQ, your step one is to read through all of the directions. When you do a DBQ, you are going to be nervous, especially the first few times that you do it. And of course, when you take the AP exam, you're going to be nervous. I want you to read through the directions because it provides you with just a game plan. Here's what I need to do. And I want you to use these bullet points here as a literal checklist. I want you to physically, if you can't digitally, whatever, but I want you to physically check off to make sure that you have done everything that the College Board wants you to do. So again, these are ways for you to be to calm yourself down, to say, hey, I know what I need to do. I know exactly where to go. So that's why step one is always to read through all of the directions. So, as we look through here the rest of the directions, the College Board will then always give you a prompt. Now, this is a whatever prompt for an AP European History one, but again, it's going to give you a simple prompt. It's going to say number one. For whatever reason, they've been putting it right next to the documents instead of on the first page. I'm not sure if they're going to put it on the first page or on the second page right above the documents. Either way, they're going to have a prompt. Before you even start reading the directions, I want you to do what we always do and break down the prompt. So let's look at Mr. Oftedal's idea of the DBQ that we're going to be looking at for this week for your supplemental assignment. And in order to do that, I just want to go to the actual assignment. Feminism. Of course it wouldn't. Women's suffrage. There it is. I want to look at the actual prompt, and I will put it on the document right now. Analyze. And then we go to our Feminism DBQ. So I'm going to modify this document right now in real time and give you the prompt, just like the College Board would. So ladies and gentlemen, here is our prompt for this one. Again, anytime you see the word analyze, you automatically think EPEX. So you want to be thinking about EPEX, how environmentally, politically, economically, culturally, socially, whatever the prompt is. Anytime you see the word the extent, you should automatically be thinking somewhat and mostly. Somewhat and mostly. So I'm going to put that here because you want to make sure that you're thinking, analyze the extent. Well, there's going to be a mostly answer to this, and there's going to be a somewhat answer to this. So analyze the extent to which revolution caused changes for the role of women in politics in Europe from 1650 to 1914. So analyze the extent to which revolution causes changes for the role of women in politics. Well, let's underline that. That's our topic. So we're looking at this topic here, and this is something that's in Chapter 17. Chapter 17 is all about these huge Atlantic revolutions that were supposed to change the face of the world and apply Enlightenment values to everywhere that these revolutions occurred. And we were supposed to be a progressive world that provided individual rights to people everywhere, no matter their skin color, no matter their gender, no matter their religion. It didn't matter. These revolutions were supposed to create an enlightened world. So what this question is essentially asking is, did that actually happen? Did these revolutions lead to more rights and a role of women in politics? And of course, then here's our place. I'll italicize that. In Europe. And then our time period here is 1650 to 1914. So we're going to be looking at before the Enlightenment, and then we're going to be looking at after the Enlightenment and essentially up until World War I in 1914. So again, we've broken down the prompt. In general, we're saying, how much did the Atlantic revolutions change the role of women in politics, and I believe in just be even better, of European women in politics from 1650 to 1914. So again, step 2 is always to break down the prompt. Make sure you understand what that prompt is asking. If you don't understand the prompt, then you're not going to be able to actually understand the documents. Because again, the documents are specifically edited in order to be able to answer the prompt. So step 2 is always break down the prompt. Well, obviously then, that means step 3 is to wait. I want you to do this step. And this is always a step that students are like, I don't want to do it. It takes too much time. It will dramatically help you do this DBQ. I want you to brainstorm possible answers to the prompts. This is going to pay huge dividends for you as you are looking through the DBQ. So if we go back to our feminism DBQ here, if we want to then brainstorm some possible answers to this, well, the Atlantic Revolutions, what are some possible shifts for women? I mean, maybe women could be more involved in politics. Maybe women could start running for or holding political office. Maybe women could begin to form political parties. Maybe women were going to be able to forming political parties. Maybe women were going to continue to be kept out of politics. Maybe women were not going to be granted rights. Maybe women were going to be seen as legally inferior to men. I mean, again, these are all just possible answers to the question. You don't have to find the right answer, but it's going to get your brain thinking about how to answer the prompt so that as you're reading the documents, your brain is already primed and ready to go to try and find the answers to the prompt. Because again, in all of these documents, you're going to start looking at the role of European women in politics. And we're going to see if these Atlantic revolutions, these Enlightenment values, to what extent did they change the role of women? So what were women like in the beginning? What was the role of women in 1914? To what extent does it change their role in politics? And again, I'm sure some of you have already read chapter 17 and you read the section. You probably have an in general idea how to answer the prompt. So the goal now is to then just start to look at these documents and start to figure out, okay, where's the evidence? What do the documents say in order to answer this question? So step 3 is always to brainstorm possible answers. So again, steps 1 through 3 is before you even read the documents. So step 1, read all of the directions. Step 2, break down the prompt. Make sure you understand it. Step 3, brainstorm possible answers to the prompt. Again, priming yourself to get ready to answer the question and to read through the documents. Step 4, this is when you start to read and analyze the documents. In order to do so, I'm going to teach you right now how to do what I call going around the horn. Now, that's a basketball term. As you pass the ball around around the three-point line, that's when you pass it. I'm sure there's other sports that also use around the horn. It's also a show on ESPN that I used to watch a whole lot when I worked in a sales company. Miss Sheldon, don't tell your dad. But that's what around the horn is. So we're going to go through our document, and I'm going to go around the horn with you as we go through this. So we're going to start with document 1. Ladies and gentlemen, the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to read through the document. So the first thing you start with is you start with the source. I want you to make sure you understand who is this. This is Olympe de Gouges. I'm not fluent in French, so gosh knows if I'm even pronouncing that correctly. And this is the selections from the Declarations of Rights of Man and Woman in France in 1790. So that's the source. That's who is saying this. Now, Olympe de Gouges is going to be a woman. In fact, most of these documents are going to be written by women, or at least discussing women in general. or the opinions of women. So this is going to be a document from a woman who has written this document, Declaration of the Rights of Man and Woman. So as we read through this document, we want to go through and kind of understand what is it that she is saying. Now, I'm going to give you guys a second to read through this document. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out a little bit so you can have it. And I want you to pause the video here, and I want you to read through it. Because once you read through it, then we'll start going around the horn. So hit pause now. Okay, welcome back. So here's what we're then going to do. You've now kind of understood the source. You know who it's coming from. You've read through the document. And now you're going to start to do the process of analyzing it. And here's what I mean by going around the horn. In order to go around the horn, we're literally going to start marking up the DBQs, going around the document to make sure that we do everything we need to do. The first step of going around the horn is to simply figure out, how does the document answer the question? So your first thing here is how it answers the question. Well, here's where you want to start to think. What does the document say about the role of women in 1790? Now, this is going to be your document 1. Document 1's probably going to give you that before and in the beginning. So what is the role of women? Now, what Olympe de Gouges is saying here is she's saying these are the rights that women should get during the French Revolution. So all of these things are evidence of things that women's lack of role in politics. And so as she's talking about these things, all of these bullet points here are things that women don't have at the time period that she thinks they deserve. So some of the answers is, well, women are unequal to men. They are legally inferior. They do not have property rights. What else did I see in here? Women were not allowed to express their opinions freely. So even socially, women weren't expected to be. Women weren't necessarily expected to be participating in politics. They weren't expected to. They weren't expected to be speaking outwardly about things outside of the home. Again, property belongs to both sexes, whether united or separated. What that means is they didn't have property rights, and they especially didn't have property rights when it came to divorce. So these are all just examples of things that women had. They're legally inferior. They're not allowed to hold public office. They're not allowed to express their opinions. And really, there's a lack of political participation. Now again, this is the most important part of analyzing the document. And that's why I start with it when I go around the horn. That's why I put it on top. How does it answer the question? In general, too, I want you to also start thinking about, well, how does it relate to my brainstorm? Which of these kind of categories that I came up with does it fit into? Now, a lot of the time, I think you're going to see, oh, wow, I actually guessed some of the things. So if you said they were kept out of politics, legally inferior to men, well, guess what? That's what you found in this document. So that's what you write up here. So you figure out how it's answering the question. On this side part here is where I want you to start doing the hip checks. This is where I want you to start thinking about what's the historical context, the intended audience, the point of view, and the purpose of this document. And let me just increase this a little bit so that the thing goes. So let's do this one together. The historical context. Whoa. The historical context. What is going on during this time period here? Well, this is 1790. This is smack dab in the middle of the French Revolution. So one of the first things you want to write is this is happening in the French Revolution. This is right after the signing of the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Notice the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, that document that the National Assembly created outlining all of the rights of all of the people of France, declaring people equal, eliminating social hierarchies, saying that France is going to be this republic. All of these wonderful Enlightenment values that were supposed to be applied weren't given to women. And so we see that it's the French Revolution. We know it's the modern era. There's Enlightenment values that have spread. I mean, these are all things that provide the historical context of this document. Sorry, it's not going to be a perfect fit here. Actually, I might be able to shrink it a little bit. There we go. The spread of Enlightenment. So the intended audience, who's supposed to read this? Well, I would imagine, since she has modeled it after a lot of the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, the National Assembly is probably supposed to be the people who are reading this. She is writing this for men who are making government decisions. The point of view of this document. So, who is Olympe de Gouges? Well, I know, because I know a little bit more. She is a wealthy woman, or wealthier woman, who has been read up in the Enlightenment, so she's educated. And she is an active participant in the French Revolution. So when you think about the point of view, you want to think, well, who are they? What's their economic status? What's their job? What's their gender? What social class are they in? She's going to, I don't actually know if she was part of the aristocracy or if she was if she was a bourgeoisie. I'm not sure which one she is, but I know that she was wealthier because clearly she was educated. So again, you're looking at who is this? How is this relevant? Or who is this? What do we know about Olympe de Gouges? What do we know about her? You want to try to think as much as you can. That doesn't mean that you have to think about absolutely everything, but it does mean that you want to at least spend some time thinking about who she is. And then lastly, what is the purpose of this document? Well, the purpose of this document is pretty straightforward. It's to convince men in the French Revolution to extend the Enlightenment values to women, a large portion of the population. So again, I've just done a quick hip check here. What the heck are all of these things? Now, I want to be clear here. You're going to be reading through these documents fairly quickly. When I give you DBQs, there'll be 7 documents, so you're supposed to be spending about 15 minutes. The College Board's probably going to recommend about 10 minutes for the 5 documents. If you went through and did all of this for every document, there is no way you will finish. So essentially what I'm saying is you want to do a hip check for whatever it is that you can, not obviously, but from what you more easily know about the document. So if you get a document and you have no idea who the intended audience is or what the purpose is, well, don't worry about it. Just try to figure out at least one of them, if not 2 of them. Because again, for 3 of the documents, you only have to use 1 of them. But if you can do all of them, that'll help you understand the document a little bit more. Me as a history teacher, I created this assignment, so I know a little bit more about the documents that we're looking at. So again, that's your hip check. I want you to do that on the side. On the bottom of the document, I want you to then think if there's any outside information that you know that isn't said in the document, but any outside information that might help you with this document. So essentially in 1650, is there anything about the role of women that you know in Europe that wasn't mentioned in the document? Well, something again that I know that honestly it was mentioned in one of the chapters, but it's a brief moment. But one of the things is that one of the only occupations allowed to women outside of the home was prostitution. In fact, prostitution in many of the cities across Europe was actually something that was legal and regulated by the government. And during the 19th century, that becomes even more regulated. That's a whole other topic of discussion. But was prostitution. And that shows that women were inferior to men. That gives you an outside piece of evidence to help prove your argument that they are legally and really politically inferior to men. You could also say another piece of outside information is that kings like Louis the 14th, or if you want to go more closely to the French Revolution, Louis the 16th, were men. And, women could not be queens. If you wanted to be really specific, because of course all of you are going to take AP European history, Catherine de' Medici, who was the wife of Louis the 13th. No, sorry, Henry. Actually, was she Louis the 13th? Oh yeah, Henry IV. Henry IV, who was the king of France, she wasn't allowed to take the throne. She had to rule kind of as a regent, and they actually even named a cardinal in the French church to be the person who ruled over France. Now again, I don't expect you to know that, and I'm not expecting you to have all of that specific information, but again, as you're going around the horn, if you can think about an outside piece of evidence, that is something that you need to do in the DBQ, so that would go underneath this bottom section here. Does that make sense? So I don't know why I'm asking for a response there. You're listening to this video. Anyway, that's what you try to do for as many of the documents as you can, but again, you at least have to do that once. So for at least one of the documents, you want to find an outside piece of evidence. On this side here is when you start to think about how do the documents relate to the other ones. What we're going to be essentially doing is we are going to be looking at or grouping the documents. That's going to make our body paragraphs. Each body paragraph is going to use a specific set of the documents. And so we want to start thinking about how do these documents relate to each other. And the way to do that is to think about those three words that the College Board loves to use. Which documents corroborate with each other? Which documents modify the one that you just read? And which documents qualify these documents? Again, corroborate means to work together. If you switch those R's with L's, then it would say collaborate. People collaborate, documents and evidence corroborates. So which other documents other than document 1 works together to show that women are going to be legally inferior to men? Which of the documents is going to modify it? So maybe there's going to be a document that comes up that says, no, actually women were able to hold political office. That's something that was fairly common in Europe. Sorry. There's no way I can unfortunately say that in European history. It's one of those sad truths since the agricultural revolution. Coffee to clear the throat. Or which documents help to qualify it? What I mean by qualify is if there's another document that goes specifically into the role of women as citizens or lack of role of women as citizens in France, or if it goes more specific about how women were allowed to express their opinions beforehand. If it goes more specific to let you know kind of the degree to which those things are true, that would be qualify. So when you're doing this, now we haven't gotten to it yet, so we haven't read any of the other documents, but when we start to read, you might notice that, well, documents 2, 3, 6, and 7 all corroborate together to say that women were legally inferior to men. That's not necessarily the case here in these documents, but that's kind of how that would go if you were looking at it. You might then say, okay, well, if those are the ones that are corroborating, gosh, I just read document 4 and it modifies my argument. It says something different. It says that women were actually granted some political rights. You want to start thinking about how these documents are going to begin working together. So that's going around the horn. Again, for each of the documents, you want to use the box as kind of a frame. At the top of the box, how does it answer the question? That's the most important one. You have to do that for all of the documents. The others are kind of as you see as you can. So when you're doing on the left-hand side here, when you're doing the hip check, you're going to do as many as you can for as many of the documents as you can. But again, you have to do this in a certain amount of time. So if you can't find it all, that's okay. Just do what you can. You want to then go on the bottom and think, well, do I know any outside information that would help to prove this argument? Because again, I know I need to do that at least once in my DBQ. So if I do, I should write that down so that I can refer back to it later. And then the last part is, how do these documents begin to work together? So as you're reading through these documents, I want you to go around the horn. And for this first supplemental assignment, that's what I want you to do. I want you to, for documents 1 through 7, I want you to go around the horn. And I want you to do your absolute best to make sure that you, A, how does it answer the question? B, see if you can do as much of the historical context as possible. Use chapter 17 as your basis. So the evidence from your notes in chapter 17, especially that section on feminism, is what I want you to use in order to help you with this. Again, College Board stuff is open book, so you can have your book open while you're doing your DBQ. I want you to then think if you can find a piece of outside evidence. For this supplemental assignment, see if you can find one for at least 3 of the documents. At least 3 of the documents. And then I want you to then start thinking about, how do these documents corroborate together? How do they work together? So again, let's just go through our steps of our DBQ to make sure that we understand how we are then to tackle it. Once you have read through all the directions, you've broken down the prompt, you've brainstormed possible answers, you've read and analyzed all the documents, that's when you begin to group the documents, to start outlining your essay. Your essay for a DBQ is essentially going to be as follows. You're going to have your introduction paragraph, which is going to contain your contextualization. Remember, time period, topic, place, and your thesis statement. And we'll go over kind of how to write your thesis statements as we go through further into this video. You then are going to have your body paragraphs. You're going to have your evidence from the documents. Again, paraphrased and explained / described is what they use. You're then going to try to do your hip check if you can for your pieces of evidence. And again, this is just going to simply be what you try to do. Now, if you do a hip check for your first 2 pieces of evidence in your first body paragraph, well, then maybe your last piece of evidence is just described. You then have your second body paragraph, at least. And you're going to do the same exact thing. Now, if you've done 2 in your first body paragraph, then you only have to hip check 1 of the ones in your second body paragraph. If you only hip check 1 in the first body paragraph, then you got to hip check at least 2 of them in the second body paragraph. Again, in the body paragraphs, you just need to make sure that you hip check 3 of the documents. And then you have your conclusion. And your conclusion is going to restate your thesis, just like you've always done, and you're going to do a synthesis. So again, if you notice, the basic format of your essay is what you've been practicing all along. So it's essentially what you've been and are used to doing. And so as you're going through and as you're formatting and thinking about your DBQ, the only difference is now you're using the evidence from the documents, and you're beginning to show your ability to analyze documents a little bit more closely. So that's essentially how to do the DBQ in general. Again, for this supplemental assignment, I want you to practice doing the around the horn part of the DBQ. So I want you to go through the rest of the documents, and there's another 6 of those documents since we did document 1 together. And I want you to go around the horn. I want you to, for all of them, make sure you answer the question. I want you to try to do your best to do a hip check for all of them. If not all of the hips are filled out, that's okay, but do your absolute best. I want you to, for at least 3 of them, come up with an outside piece of information from Chapter 17, specifically that feminism section. And then I also want you to then try to start thinking about how these documents work together. And so when I say group your documents, here's what I mean by doing that. And I want you to practice doing this too. What you are going to be looking at is, how does the role of women change? So in general, you're going to see things like women were legally inferior to men. And you're just going to say, which documents prove that? Well, documents 1, 2 prove that. As I start looking at these documents, even just kind of quickly, I'm going to go ahead and say, well, document 3 is a little bit different here, but we can then create documents 1 and 2, at least show that. Or women are kept out of politics is another group that you could have found. Documents 1, 2 definitely say that. Document 3 is going to outline that as well, as we look at Emmeline Pankhurst. Alice Paul is going to start seeing that women are certainly not allowed in politics, as she's going to publicly criticize one of the key members of Parliament and get in trouble for that. So document 1, 2, 3, and 4. But you also might start to see that women are going to begin to speak out in public for their rights. And honestly, I mean, documents 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to show that. You're going to see women begin to get violent, use violence to fight for political rights. That's going to be especially in documents 4, 5, 6, and 7. But again, here's how you start to group these documents. You figure out what these documents say, how they answer the question, and the ones that corroborate are going to form your groups. So when you go out into, eventually, you don't have to do it for this assignment, but when you start to do your DBQ and you start to look at your body paragraphs, you're going to choose the 2 categories here that are going to, A, represent however it answers the prompt, so we have to think about a somewhat or mostly. And then your body paragraphs are going to be 2 of these or 3 of these, however many you have to do. Body paragraphs are simply going to just do 2 or 3 of these categories, and as long as you use all of the documents, it's okay. So this first body paragraph, it says that it somewhat changes in that women begin to speak out publicly and use violence to fight for their rights. And when we say evidence from documents, I would then modify it to say, well, okay, here we go. Evidence from document 1, document 2, 3. And then maybe, because I'll use some of these documents too, maybe we'll look at documents 4, document 5, documents 6, whatever, 5. Notice it actually doesn't have to be in order, so I'm actually glad I made that mistake. It doesn't have to be in order at all. And then maybe you do evidence from another document because you have 4 documents in this category. That's okay. Document 7. So, you know, maybe your body paragraph is going to be this. That means your second body paragraph is it mostly stays the same, and women are not granted the right to vote. Right? And you could go ahead and use evidence from documents 1, document 2, document 3. Maybe you want to kind of add a document towards the end, and so maybe instead of talking about document 5 here, you just talk about document 7 in this paragraph, and you modify it as you go. That's kind of the fun thing about doing a DBQ is you get to be a little bit more creative with your evidence. From document 5. And there would be your essential frame for your evidence. And you hip check whichever 3 you can. I want you to notice this paragraph has 4 or 3 documents. This paragraph has 4. We go based off of what the documents show and what categories we can figure out. Now, we'll have subsequent videos on specifically how to write the essay and actually going through it. For today, I just wanted to go through the basics. I think this video is long enough as it is. So again, these are the basic steps of doing a DBQ. Step 6, write your essay. So if you go through these steps of doing it, that will help you be successful in the DBQ. Step 1, reading through all the directions. Step 2, breaking down the prompt. Step 3, brainstorming possible answers to the prompt. Step 4, read and analyze the documents by going around the horn. Step 5, group the documents to start outlining your essay. And then step 6, you start writing your essay. Now we're going to be going through specifically each of those skills as we practice and practice and practice, which is why for this assignment, what I really want you to focus on is the document analysis part. So I want you to go around the horn for the rest of these documents and simply do that on the Google Doc that I have put on our weekly schedule. So if you have any questions, let me know. This video is very long, but I hope it was somewhat helpful. Feel free to watch this video multiple times. And again, we're going to be practicing and practicing and practicing. So by the time the AP exam comes, I think you're going to be pretty well set up. For now, opt it all out.